Welcome to the continuation of our Read Aloud, The Split History of Westward Expansion. We have used reading strategies in chapters 1 and 2 to identify text structure and multiple main ideas. Today, let's read on, still using those strategies, to help us now summarize our reading by asking ourselves what's the big idea, and how do the other details connect to this big idea. We're continuing on today to chapter 3, Connecting the East and the West. Western settlers needed supplies such as cloth, tools, and nails, as well as food staples of flour, coffee, and sugar. Transportation systems were built to get needed goods to settlers. Canals connected natural waterways, making it much easier for goods to be carried from one part of the country to another. The Erie Canal was built to connect Lake Erie with the Hudson River in New York. After it was finished in 1825, it was possible to ship goods across New York much more quickly. Instead of taking weeks for a shipment of goods to arrive, it only took 8 days. The finished canal was 363 miles long. In 1848, the 96-mile Illinois and Michigan Canal was completed on the Chicago and Illinois rivers. The canal created a water route from the Mississippi River to the Great Lakes, allowing shipment of bulky items such as stone, lumber, and grain. If I pause here to think about my reading, I'm noticing that the author is telling me about the transportation systems that were needed to get goods or supplies to settlers. If I remember correctly from chapter 2, the settlers couldn't take many belongings with them or goods and supplies with them on their wagon trail, because it created too much weight in the wagon for the oxen to pull, and some of their belongings were left on the trail side. So once they moved out to Oregon, they would need a continuous supply of goods in order to survive. One example that the author is giving me of a transportation system are canals, and you can see right here in this text feature, which is an illustration of a canal, which is a pathway, a water pathway, from a larger body of water to a smaller body of water to an area located near the smaller body of water. So for instance, we have the Erie Canal was built to connect Lake Erie with the Hudson River in New York, and the Hudson River connects to Hudson Bay, which connects to the Atlantic Ocean. So therefore we have transportation of goods from a larger body of water to smaller body of waters, and they make their way inland to the settlers who have just settled the frontier. Many areas of the West didn't have strong river systems that would support canals. Canals also froze during cold winters and needed continual maintenance to keep operating. Another form of fast transportation was needed for the West. That system was the iron horse, the railroad. Before settlers began to move west, railroads already crisscrossed much of the East, connecting small towns to big cities. Huge steam engines pulled train cars loaded with freight and other cars filled with the passengers. President Abraham Lincoln wanted a train line that would run across the country to California. In 1863, construction began on the Transcontinental Railroad. I'm going to pause here to think about my reading. And if I think about what I've just read in the previous paragraphs, I could see a cause and effect text structure. Because goods and supplies needed to be delivered to the settlers, the United States government built canals to connect larger body of waters to smaller body of waters through a canal system. But as I read through these paragraphs, I notice that it's more of a problem and solution, because many areas of the West didn't have strong river systems, so canals could not be supported. So they had to think of another way to get these goods to settlers. So they thought of the Transcontinental Railroad. So even though we start off with one text structure, sometimes the author can change the structure based on information that they're trying to tell you. So right now, the information that I'm gathering, he's trying to tell me, is about the transportation systems that were created in order to bring supplies and goods to settlers throughout the United States. a massive undertaking. In Omaha, Nebraska, the Union Pacific Company began work on a transcontinental railroad. The Central Pacific Company began doing the same thing in Sacramento, California. The two companies began laying track with the plan that they would eventually meet in the middle and become one railroad line. Building a large railroad was a huge undertaking. It would have to go over grassy prairies and through steep mountain passes. Bridges had to be built over rivers and gorges. Thousands of workers were needed to clear the land, tunnel through the mountains, and lay track. In the west, 12,000 Chinese workers helped blast passages through the Sierra Nevada for the Central Pacific. The Chinese gained reputations as hard workers, making them desirable employees. In the Nebraska Territory, 10,000 men worked on the railroad for the Union Pacific, including Irish immigrants and African Americans. As I pause here to think about my reading, I'm still seeing a problem and solution text structure. The large railroad had to go over grassy prairies, steep mountain passage, bridges had to be built, tunnels had to be blasted. But what I'm also noting is a little bit of the big idea that I think the author is trying to tell me, is that with this new need for transportation to deliver goods, the United States citizens are actually working together to solve their problems and get goods delivered to people who need them. Mormon settlement. Mormons belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Joseph Smith founded the church in New York in 1830. Many people didn't care for the church's ideas, so Mormons moved to Ohio, Missouri, and then Illinois, searching for a place to practice their religion. After Smith was murdered in 1844, Mormon leader Brigham Young moved the center of the church farther west, finally settling in 1847 near the Great Salt Lake in present-day Utah. By 1849, about 5,000 Mormons lived in Utah, building the town of Salt Lake City, which is the center of the Mormon Church. Workers faced harsh blizzards, windstorms, the blazing sun, and the bitter cold. Accidents and illnesses claimed many lives. The workers also worried about attacks by American Indians. The Indians didn't want to see the railroad completed, since it was sure to bring more settlers. So I'm going to pause here and think about the details that can connect to my bigger idea of how the United States citizens are starting to work together to solve their problems. Well, right here on this page, I have that the Chinese workers who were immigrants to the New World, along with Irish and African American immigrants, all worked together to build this railroad. I also see on earlier pages how the canals were built to transfer goods from larger body of waters to smaller body of waters to inland, which were also built by immigrants, working together to solve their problems. But the work continued, and the Transcontinental Railroad was finished in 1869, transforming the United States in the process. At a May 10th ceremony in Promontory, Utah, silver, gold, and iron spikes were used to complete the track. A telegraph message spread the news across the country. The last rail is laid. The Pacific Railroad is completed. All over the country, people began to celebrate as soon as they heard the news. It was now possible to travel from one American coast to the other on the railroad. Wagon travel soon became a thing of the past. Anyone who could afford the price of a railroad ticket could go west. If you remember from chapter 1, when we came up with those multiple main ideas about our reading thus far, one of them was that the European settlers came to the New World in order to enhance or better their lives. So I can definitely see how their lives have enhanced. They were able to work together to solve their problems, to become prosperous and earn a living. In some aspects, they were able to find places to worship their religion more freely than before. And the United States has now become a whole country spanning from the east to west coasts. The Pony Express. Founded in 1860, the Pony Express was a system that delivered mail across the country in 10 days. The route of the Pony Express was almost 2,000 miles long. Pony Express riders, mostly teenage boys who were able to handle the physical challenges of the job, rode horses as fast as they could. Riding the horses so fast wore them out, so new horses were needed constantly. Riders got fresh horses every 10 to 20 miles at Pony Express stations. The Pony Express lasted only 19 months. In 1861, the transcontinental telegraph system, which sent messages across the country in minutes, ended the need for the fast riders of the Pony Express. So again, pausing to think about my reading, I'm looking at the creation of the Pony Express, which in other words was a way to deliver mail through the country from the East Coast to the West Coast. But again, looking at that big idea from the author, I'm noticing that it took a lot of people to work together because it says the riding the horses so fast wore them out. New horses were needed constantly. So you needed to have people who owned these horses, who had these stations with barns and the ability to take care of the horses, and you needed different riders. So again, that detail helps to connect to that big idea by people working together to make the United States a better place and to get items, supplies, telegrams, letters to those who lived in different parts of the country. So let's review. We were looking at what's the big idea that the author was trying to tell us. And I know some of you would pick right away transportation. And yes, the chapter was about transportation systems such as the canal and the railroad and the Pony Express. However, I think it's more than that. I think the author was trying to tell me that with the new immigrants to the United States and the United States actually becoming a country instead of colonies, I think all these different people from all these different backgrounds learned to work together in order to solve their problems and make their lives better. That was one of their goals that they had, was to enhance and better their lives from where they came from. And I think the author's trying to tell me that we need to learn to work together, even though we have different ideas and different backgrounds, so that we can be prosperous and make our lives better. So what are some details that connect? Well, one, we built the canals in order to get goods to people on the frontier. When that didn't work out, when there was a problem, people came together and thought about bridges and tunnels that needed to be built. We had different immigrants working on those bridges and tunnels. And then we had the Pony Express when things needed to be delivered or messages need to be sent. We have different people working together in order to get those messages delivered. So what's the big idea? That we need to learn to work together, solve our problems so that we can have a better life. So now, try this with your reading today. What big idea is the author really trying to tell you using information from Westward Expansion?